Today we are interviewing Alan G. Schaffer, who was the International and Foreign Law Librarian at Georgetown University Law School from 1983 until 1998, when she moved to Hamburg, Germany, and became the librarian at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. She held this position until 2006, when she became the chief librarian of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, which is headquartered in Santiago, Cuba. Chile. I'm sorry, I misspoke. After her retirement in 2011, due to the UN's mandatory retirement age, Ellen moved back to the Washington, D.C. area and presently is consulting here at American University's Pence Law Library as the library prepares to move to its new facilities in about 2 years. I wanted to mention that as I mentioned, we're here at American University. They're hosting us today, and we're in the faculty library. Ellen, let's begin with a little bit about your personal history. Can you tell us a little about your life when you were young and perhaps today?
Well, we'll start at the beginning, I guess. Thank you, Pat. I was born and raised in Manhattan, and frankly, I never thought that I would live anywhere else but New York City until I did, and then the whole world opened up. My father was an endodontist, a dentist, and he had his practice on the first floor of a townhouse at 78th and West End Avenue, and that's where I grew up. I think that the one major experience I should mention here that had a big influence on my future career came about when the summers I turned 14, 15, and 16. I spent summers in Oaxaca, Mexico, with a wonderful woman who ran a summer program for teenage girls. She was an educator who had become interested in a program, A.S. Neal's progressive and unorthodox school called Summerhill in England. And so we were 14 or 15 girls who lived at her home in Oaxaca, and we learned about a totally different culture. So we learned language, customs, folk dances, and basically it changed my life. For elementary and high school, I went to the Birchwathen School in Manhattan, and that was fine. I was spending summers out of the country at that point. My father died suddenly when I was in just entering my senior year of high school, and I decided to go to the State University of New York at Albany for college. At that point, things got, I suppose, more interesting, at least to me. At the end of my freshman year of college, I decided to get married, and I married a Cuban student. He was a U.S. resident, and we moved to Venezuela. He was basically hoping that by doing so, he would be avoiding the draft. He was never drafted, but he was expecting to be drafted, and he didn't have to stay in the U.S. And we were there about 9 months. We applied to go to the university in Caracas, and they were happy to take our registration money, but they never opened. They were having unrest in the country, and the campus shut down, and so we spent a lot of time waiting around for them to reopen, and eventually returned to the U.S. for a few months. Got student visas to Mexico, and we moved to Mexico City, where I attended the University of the Americas. I was a Spanish language and literature major with a second major in Inter-American Studies, and returned to SUNY Albany to complete my BA. I then went to Columbia University for library school, and got divorced after that and moved to Washington, D.C. in January 1973.
So essentially, you got your degrees up in New York State, and actually Manhattan.
Well, the graduate degree in Manhattan.
Yeah,
and
in Columbia.
And the BA in
and you
in
overcame
Albany.
the tendency that a lot of people who live in the city allegedly have, since I've never lived there, that they wouldn't want to live anyplace else. But
well, I think
maybe that was your experiences in Mexico as a teenager, and then other places.
Well, at the time I graduated from library school, the question really was, where could you find a job?
Ah.
And I figured I was coming out of a divorce. I didn't. I guess I felt that if I couldn't find one in Washington with so many agencies and possibilities, that I thought I would have a better chance there.
Mhm.
So.
It's interesting, the job market has brought other people to DC. In another interview, Kate Martin actually,
Mhm.
she describes that she was out in Los Angeles and in library school and had occasion to come here to Washington DC for something, and she was looking, of course, around for work, and she discovered that in perusing the Washington Post, which still had the job ads pretty much for everybody, she noticed that there were more jobs in this town for librarians than she'd seen in months, just on one weekend here, advertised than she'd seen for months in Los Angeles. So, and she also said she noticed a lot of them were in law libraries. So
Well,
that's
I
how
wasn't-
she
I
sort of
wasn't-
came
yeah.
to this city. And
I wasn't thinking about law libraries at that
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
well, you started out actually as the Romance Languages Descriptive Cataloger at the Library of Congress.
Mhm.
And then you moved to the Organization of American States as a reference librarian. And it wasn't until after that, in 1982, that you became the foreign law bibliographer at the University of Miami before you came to Georgetown about a year later. So with sort of that background, could I ask how you happened to become attracted to the law library end of our profession as opposed to remaining in other types of libraries?
Well, sure, I'll be glad to explain it. But first, you realize that all the jobs I've had, and certainly before I became a law librarian, had to do with languages, where I
Yes.
could use my language.
Yes.
And that really was wonderful to me, because I had at SUNY Albany, I had started out as a Spanish language and lit major, but with taking education courses. And I student taught 3 days, and I cried for 3 days straight, seventh graders, and changed from an education minor. And so I was looking for a career where I could use languages, and somebody suggested library science. So, but my introduction to the world of law libraries came in a really unexpected way. When I was at the Organization of American States, and I was using Spanish there, I was also I was a member of the Special Libraries Association, and they had an annual meeting in New York City. I had written a guide on business information in Latin America that the OAS published, and I was asked to speak at a panel at this SLA meeting. It must have been around 1977. I had never given a public presentation, and I was really quite nervous. So I remember that the panel members were invited to a luncheon in one of these office buildings in downtown Manhattan. We must have been on the 35th floor or something. We had a beautiful view, but what I remember most is they gave us wine. And I relaxed a little bit, and which was good, because when we got to the auditorium, to the conference room, it was packed. It could have been 5 people, I would have been nervous, but there was way over 200 people in the room. And so I started my presentation, and I noticed that there was a man in the front row who was smiling and nodding at me. And I basically gave the presentation to him. I didn't do what people say is you talk to different parts of the room. I talked to this person, and I didn't know who he was. Turned out he was Igor Kavas, who at that time was the director of the law library at Vanderbilt. And we chatted, and I took his card. And some months later, I saw an advertisement for a job opening at the University of Arizona. And I applied on a whim, which is something that I've done periodically in my career, always leading to new experiences. And a few weeks passed, and I got a phone call from Ron Cherry, who was the director
I
at the
remember
time.
Ron, yeah. He was
Yeah.
a year ahead of me in library school
Oh,
at
really?
the University of Washington. Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, he asked me to come out for an interview, and I was just appalled, because I'm a New York person, an East Coast person, and I thought, what have I done? But he convinced me to come out and meet them and talk. So I did, and that first night that I was there, they invited me to dinner. Maybe it was the second night. I remember that I saw the most spectacular sunset I've ever seen in my life. I was getting ready to go out to dinner, and I just sat down and watched. They actually invited me they offered me this job that night, and I didn't know what to say. I said I would go back to Washington and I would call them. I had to think about it. So when I got back the next day, the only person I knew in law librarianship was Igor. So I called him, and he said, "Oh, you don't want to go there. Their emphasis is really Mexican private international law."
Mhm.
And I didn't know, but he said, give him a few hours, he'd call me back. And a few hours later, he had spoken to Betty Liebes, who was the director at the University of Miami Law School. And they didn't have an opening, but they invited me down. I don't know what he said about me. They invited me to come down for an interview, and they created an opening for me as a foreign and international law librarian. I accepted, and I went to Miami.
Mhm.
That was my first law library job. I was there only for 1 year, more or less, and Betty Liebes had a stroke. I don't know if you knew her.
I did, yes. Mhm.
And Miami really wasn't for me, but it was during that December that I saw an announcement for the position at Georgetown,
Mhm.
and I applied for it. So had I not gone to the New York meeting and met Igor and applied for the job in Arizona, gone to Miami, I never would have gotten the job at Georgetown. I had 1 year of experience.
Mhm.
Now I applied, and I waited, and it turns out I had competition. Adolf Sprutz had applied.
Mhm.
They had asked him to apply, and he was trying to decide what to do because they wanted him to take the job at Georgetown. He was, as you know, the international law librarian at the University of Chicago,
Yes.
with years of experience.
Very highly regarded.
Right. The problem is he didn't want to do any reference work.
Oh,
And Georgetown needed somebody who would do collection development and reference work and
Mhm.
everything else too.
yeah.
And I was happy to do everything. So after many months' wait, they offered me the position. I had an interview, I was offered the position, and I moved back to Washington. And I wanted to mention something here that I don't have a law degree.
Mhm.
And I know that it's often in the literature and in conversations the importance of having the dual degree or not. I've been very fortunate. I
Mhm.
don't believe I was hindered by not having a law degree. But I found something I loved to do, and it turned out I was good at it. And I think that's the key, is to find something that you love, and then you'll be good at it.
Well, you know, in our era,
Mhm.
the profession was still evolving. Just prior to when you and I were into it, Ellen, a
Mhm.
lot of people became law librarians that didn't have any academic credentials, no degrees. They'd basically been working at the law school, for example, or a law
Mhm.
firm, and had the knack to kind of organize the library, and whoever was in charge put them in charge of that.
Yeah, yeah.
I know there were the lady that had been the previous director at the University of Houston before my director, Al Coco, was appointed there. A woman named Smith, Mabel Smith,
Mhm.
did not have any
Mhm.
background, but she knew how to run libraries from having learned it by doing it.
That's right.
And then people with one or the other degree, you had quite a few who had law degrees
Mhm.
or they had library degrees, and we complemented each other in that sense.
Yeah.
And then more and more of us started to come through the system. I was one of them who had both
Mhm.
law and library degrees. But many of the jobs did not. You didn't necessarily want somebody with certain credentials. I would hire a dual degreed person for certain roles here
Right.
when I was at American as director. But many of the librarians were like yourself.
Mhm.
They had library degrees
Mhm.
because it was the library degree that taught you how to do research, how to access information
Mhm.
that lawyers needed someone to be able to do for them and help them with.
Right.
So often the work people without the law degree could do in the law library was exactly what was really required of
That's
the
right.
job.
It depends.
Yeah.
And depends on the person you find
Yeah.
too, of course.
And another, of course, a criticism, even, all through my life here in this country, has been that Americans, we speak English, but we don't learn to speak anything else or read anything else much. And with your language background, it must have been a tremendous help in the work you were doing with international and foreign law.
I think you need languages for international and foreign law, but
Very
in Miami,
much.
I certainly needed it.
Yeah, much more perhaps than certain other degrees that you might not have had.
Well, I started at Georgetown in August 1983 after attending my first AALL workshop in July. So Bob Oakley, who was the director there, sent
Okay.
me to a workshop in Austin.
Bob was
July.
fairly new there in those
Yeah, he had been
days.
there a year.
Yeah, I think Terry Martin had preceded him immediately and gone
Yes.
up to Harvard.
That's right.
Yeah.
I stayed at Georgetown from '83 until 1998, and together with Bob and a great team of colleagues, we developed the International and Foreign Law Collection there. They
You
were
got
really
that
special.
wonderful new building with space to house it too.
But that was after I left.
Oh, that
Yeah.
was after you left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was in one building. We moved to the law library building. But if you're referring to the third.
Oh, no,
which
I was
one?
thinking of the Williams building,
No,
the
that-
interim,
I
where it
was
was
there
such
for
a
that.
tremendous expansion
Yes.
from what they'd had on one of the
That's
couple of the
right.
upper floors of the
Right.
main
So I was
building.
there for that move.
Law school.
Yeah, I was there for that,
Yeah.
and we filled it. I had a wonderful job and resources to build a really good collection. I was happy. But what happened during those years is I met and married my husband,
Ah.
who happened to be a professor of physics at the University of Pennsylvania,
All right.
which was not geographically convenient.
It's up
so
in
after-
Philadelphia,
Right.
isn't it? Yeah.
After 9 years of commuting each week, I would go up Thursdays, work at home in Philadelphia Fridays, and come back straight to the office on Mondays. I'd had enough. I knew the names of the conductors on Amtrak by heart. So on another whim, I applied for a job at the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea in Hamburg,
Mhm.
Germany, and I got it. And
Sort
so-
of, if you're going to commute, you might as well at least
Well, Sid
no
came-
longer be able to do it by train. Was that
That's
the
right.
criteria?
No, Sid came with me. He
Ah,
came with me, so
good.
yeah. It was the first time in our marriage that we had everything moved together in one. Everything we owned ended up in that apartment in Hamburg.
Mhm.
And when we unpacked and we mixed the books, first we found duplicates, but then he said, "Well, that's it. The books are mixed. We've got to stay married." That was a long time ago. In any case, we thought we would go for about 2 years, and it turned out to be 8. I like to say that inertia is a very strong force. It's not so easy to get settled in a foreign country, and once you get settled, you don't leave so quickly. We love living in Europe. That was great. The tribunal was relatively new when I started, and I developed this library. So I was buying, at that point, we were buying books, we were subscribing to databases, and getting ready to move into the tribunal's new building also. But until we moved, the library was in boxes and some temporary shelving in a couple of rooms, and the judges, the 21 judges, had created their own classification scheme. I wasn't there for the creation, but what they had done is they had scotch taped 8.5 by 11 pages to the shelves, indicating what was on each shelf. But it really wasn't very satisfactory, and none of the books had any labels. And although it's not very good for preservation, I went out and got a glue stick and labels, and we just started to catalog the books so that we could find things, and people would come to return a book and say, "Where should I put this?" And I'd say, "Put it next to another blue book." I mean, there was no system,
It
really.
sounds like the system, you had to have a phenomenal memory to know where to look in the first place and then how to take the book back to where you found it
Well,
originally.
it was interesting. But anyway, it moved along, and we moved to a new building. The catalog, the collection was cataloged, and I did get an integrated library system. Um, so after 8 years of living in northern Germany, 8 years of northern German weather,
Mhm.
we were ready for a change, and I applied for the post in Chile of chief librarian at the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean in Santiago. And really it was another whim. I didn't think I would get the job. I was interviewed by video. It was
Video conference? kind of?
conference, yeah. So I was in a tiny room, and there was a huge screen, and I could see myself and the panel. And the interview was all in Spanish with 5 different accents and people speaking very quickly.
Mhm.
And I thought, oh well, you know. But I did get it, and I knew that I would be able to communicate there better than I could in Germany, where when I moved to Germany I could find you a law report or a statute,
Mhm.
but I couldn't order dinner, really. When I left I could do all 3,
Good.
so I could accomplish that. And in Santiago, the commission, although advertised as a bilingual commission, the language in the halls and in meetings is Spanish, and so I quickly had to get even more fluent than I was. We were there 6 years.
Mhm.
And we worked hard with my team. I worked hard to improve services without much of a budget, really, and to convert the catalog from what was CD ISIS records to MARC records so that we could have an integrated library catalog, library system. And I used to think about the resources that I had available at Georgetown compared to these 2 places, Itlos and ECLAC. And really, it's so much harder to develop a collection when you have no money.
Yeah, we used to all be envious of Bob and his budgets.
Yeah, I mean, really, we were so fortunate.
Yeah.
But it takes a lot more thought to spend fewer dollars.
That's right. You can afford a few mistakes if you have more of a resource to
Yeah.
spend on books and resources.
I think so. I wanted to mention one thing that I did when I was at Georgetown that was a consulting job that I really haven't talked much about, but it was fun. At that point, Redex, Newsbank Redex,
Mhm.
contacted me. They wanted to develop a UN collection of microfiche. And I put together the law library package for them.
Okay.
And I think that many libraries purchased that instead of buying the entire UN collection. And I was
Mhm.
very pleased with that project. So, what else can I tell you?
Well, it sounds like you've had a very rich and enjoyable career. I mean, a few interesting moves. The weather in northern Germany, I guess, in the winter especially. Isn't
Oh, it
so
rains all
great.
year,
Yeah.
practically in northern
Yeah.
Germany, not just winter.
Well, of course, I live in an area of this country that allegedly gets an awful lot of rain out in the Pacific Northwest near Seattle. And, but, you know, it doesn't rain all the time, actually.
It's very similar
Yeah.
to Hamburg.
It's a marine environment in the right direction for the flow of winds to bring in the stuff.
You know what
rain.
they say, when it rains in London, the people in Hamburg take out their umbrellas.
Oh, is that how it works?
Yeah.
The weather forecast, you check to see what's happening in London,
Yeah.
and then you know what's going to happen in a short while. Huh?
Right, right.
You've done something that is probably pretty unique. I mean, there are small things of this sort, like Alan Pollock left some money to ELL for scholarship, but you established and provided the initial funding, and I think supplemental funding in that sense, to the Foreign Comparative and International Law Library Special Interest Section's Ellen Schaffer Grant for Foreign Law Librarians. I'd like to talk about that, because that is something that I think is very important. Not that you've done it, but that it's been done, and you've sort of set a high bar for many of us in terms of helping each other in a way that's different from some of the mentor-mentee relationships that are more common and so on. And I'd like to ask you about that, and maybe talk about how you decided to do this and then what you see as a result.
Oh, I'm happy to talk about the grant. I'm not sure when I started to think about it. I was already living in Hamburg, and as you know from today's interview, I've had an interest in things international ever since I lived and spent summers in Mexico as a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
My motivation came from wanting to share what I saw were benefits from my membership and experiences in the association. Remember that I wasn't a law librarian when I started there, and it just meant a lot to me, and my career has meant a lot to me. So I often thought, well, if I'm a good international and foreign law librarian, a lot of my success really comes from the people who I could call upon to help me. And often they were people I've met when I've traveled, but also very generous colleagues who participate on INTLAW, which is a listserv of the FCIL-SIS, the Foreign Comparative and International Law Special Interest Section. And so I've been thinking, what could I do? And at that time, what came to my mind was that law librarians from overseas would benefit from seeing our annual meetings, from attending the educational programs and seeing how, really how successful I think the association is and how we help one another. So I thought as well that the larger membership, not just the members of the SIS, would benefit from meeting foreign law librarians, librarians from overseas, and meeting them in person to hear about their own systems and their challenges. Everyone has challenges, after all. I approached Roger Parent about it at the association, and he's the one who talked me into naming it the FCIL Schaffer Grant, and he hoped it would encourage others. I've not always been pleased that I agreed to do it, but that's what it is. But I was mostly pleased that ALL's executive board agreed to match my gift. And so, yes, I gave the money, they matched it, and the first recipient was able to attend during Bob Oakley's presidency. He had been such a friend, a good friend and mentor, and a colleague of mine for so many years. I was pleased to have that happen. The first, that was 2001, and that was Sanya Batalova from the Kyrgyz Republic. And we've had people, there have been 11 recipients so far.
I think it's been given every year except
Well, I'll tell
the
you
year
about
after that.
Yeah, I'll tell you what happened. Anyway, I had no clear idea how this would work. It was just amazing how naive I was. There were lots of things to learn. For example, the reason there was no recipient in 2002 is that the State Department, there was a grantee selected. The State Department refused to give the person a visa.
Oh.
And we had not, there was just not enough time to select another person and to have that person get a visa. And that's when we started to have an earlier deadline and to make sure that the recipient applied for the visa right away. And we also have thought about alternate candidates in case the visa was not granted. We've had trouble over the years with candidates who can't cash a check, for example. So we now have a system of they have to somehow or other be able to lay out the money and be reimbursed at the conference the first day they come. But it's all been a learning experience. In many cases, the person just doesn't even have a bank account. So we've had wonderful candidates, wonderful recipients over the years, and I really do think that they have contributed to our profession in so many ways, substantially through their presentations, but also through interactions at the annual meetings. And over the years, some law libraries have hosted these people after the meeting or before. And so almost always, the past couple of years, the recipient has traveled a bit, and often sharing a room at the conference with someone and then going to that person's law library, university. The people who have come have also been helpful when ALL members have needed assistance. And I know a number of instances where they've posted something on it law and the recipient has responded. The one particular interesting presentation that I'll never forget was when the recipient in 2009, the recipient from Afghanistan, presented his talk and showed what the challenges are for building a law library in a war zone. And you could just feel in the room how everybody, all of our problems just shrink in comparison.
Or we certainly don't have some of those, I imagine. that he
It was
had.
just amazing.
Yeah.
And I've been so happy that seven or so of the 11 presentations are available online at the SIS website, either PDF or now podcasts. So people who don't go to the meeting can hear and see the presentation. It's been a privilege to participate, and I'm just pleased it's worked out so well. But I want to take this opportunity to thank the association, not only for matching the grant, but each year they have helped sponsor the grant recipient by paying for a full registration. And I want to thank so many of the FCIL, SIS members and the executive boards, because they have not only contributed to the grant, but they have met each year to plan on the future of the grant, because we're quite worried about how it will be self-sustaining. We don't want it to stop.
Yeah.
And we weren't always sufficiently organized. We were very often naive, but I think that at this point there's some structure there. There's a subcommittee, and they do meet, and they have plans, and it's working more smoothly.
Yeah. Well, I noticed that the SIS controls who gets these in a proper sense.
Yes.
So it's not
There's a process.
somebody picking a friend or two or anything
No,
like that. It's,
no,
it's
no.
competitive
Yes,
in a
people-
legitimate sense.
Oh, yes, and it's a committee of 3, and there are applications, there are deadlines, and there are references that are called, and no, I think it's
Yeah.
come a long way.
Well, again, as I said, as we sort of moved into this,
Yeah.
I really think you've done a tremendously important thing, and I really appreciate it as a colleague who wasn't really active in the association in the years when this has occurred, but it's exactly the kind of thing that I think is very important.
Well, it's been wonderful, and anytime you do attend, I know you're planning to go to next year's meeting.
I'm able to go this
or
year.
even this year.
This year,
The-
and I'm hoping next year, yes.
Well,
I
the
was saying at
recipient
lunch.
this year is from Norway.
Good.
And
Maybe I'll meet
It's a he.
A he,
Yeah.
a gentleman.
Yeah, so
I
Mr.
look
Tuset.
forward to it.
Yes.
I don't have an awful lot on my schedule at the annual meeting since I've
You can go to
retired,
the
so
meeting.
I can go and
to
meet
his
people.
And you can go to
Yeah.
hear his presentation.
Sure,
Yeah.
I want to do that.
Good.
Yeah. Alan, you and I have something else in common, well, in a whole sense, but in a very broad sense, in that I was, of course, at American U when we opened the building that we're currently in this afternoon, about 15, 18 years or so back. And I do know that the school is about to be moving in about 2 years to a new facility that's being constructed nearby. Now, you have come in with all this experience in your area. You are now working as I think it's technically a consultant basis here at the American University's Pence Law Library for Billy Joe Kaufman, my successor, and the colleagues here. That intrigues me. I'd like to know a little bit, if you could share a little bit
Oh, sure.
about what it is you're doing and that sort of thing.
Sure. When I retired from the UN, only because they had a mandatory retirement age, then you have to figure out if you can live anywhere in the world, where do you want to live? So we did decide to move to Washington, where I had lived before, and I also knew I wanted to continue to work, and so I was really pleased that I had this opportunity to work part-time here. And what I've been asked to do is to review the collection, and it's turning out not only to be international law, but I'm looking through the collection because the new building will have less space for the law library than what you have here now.
That's probably reality
Yes,
in
no,
today's
it's
environment.
the measurements have been done. So I'm helping to review the print collection to see what might be available, even now, in electronically in a reliable form. Identify materials that could be weeded. I call it the reverse of shop till you drop. It's what can you now that you purchased before, unfortunately, what can you weed? And in some cases it might mean that you keep one copy, but you have 2 or 3 copies and you don't need that many. So that's part of it, and identifying materials that where you could withdraw the print and catalog the electronic separately, and some cases keep the print but include a link in the record, making recommendations, and things are being pulled off the shelf. I also did it with the microfiche collections that were international.
Yeah.
One fun thing that I'm doing that I had never done before, in Chile I had the staff, we purchased a product called lip guides. Can I say that? I guess so.
You can say anything you want.
But we purchased lip
The
guides.
censors are not allowed to touch what
We
we
purchased
submit.
lip guides and my staff used it. I had never created one, so I've been starting to work on that, and it's been fun. I did a guide on the Inter-American System of Human Rights,
All right.
and I'm working on a different one now. Now, obviously, not everything's online, and then even if it's online, you need to think, is it going to stay online? You know, before you withdraw your print materials,
Yes.
how reliable is it? How permanent? Will there be, 20 years from now, a historic record of what you've found today?
That's one of the aspects of the digitalization of so much of our information that's worried a lot of us, even when I was still active, that, with technology changing, even if it was, shall we say, preserved, it might be that the technology moves beyond and you can't access it.
Sure. I mean, as I've moved, we all had computer disks and even the 3x5, the 3.5 disks and diskettes.
Yeah. Well, we started with the first computers I had anything to do with had an 8-inch disc, and that was tremendous. 'Cause
That's right.
up until then, they'd had to have tapes to keep.
Well, you
all
can't
that.
even read these things anymore. So.
No.
Yeah. So that any collection development decision that's made is going to have to take this into consideration, and there are people who are studying and writing about these issues, of course. But even so, there are things that are obviously candidates for reading.
Well, one of the changes that I think is a very positive change in my era, the whole evaluation of a place of a law school seemed to be tied to the size of the book collection in its library.
Sure.
And I had deans come to me. Oh, they were beside themselves. We were at a point in the so-called pecking order of law schools, they thought, that could only be enhanced if somehow we could go to a higher level of books in the library. And, and that went on. And of course, as a director, I used it as a device to get resources all the time. And some of the things you're weeding, I'm sure, were products of those acquisitions over those years. But at least now, with the alternative technology that has come in to present this information in very usable forms and other formats, and the de-emphasis finally that's occurring in something as, should I say, artificial as mere volume count of books. And even in my day, we had all sorts of differences of opinion within the association and the profession as to how you counted volumes, because as microfilm came in, microfiche, it didn't work quite the same way as books on the shelf.
Sure. I think that the challenge is, how do you present the collections, the materials that you've identified as important, how do you present it to your community so that you're offering them something that they need and help them understand the materials a little bit beyond just using Google. Otherwise everyone's the same.
Yeah.
So presentation, and I think there will be a role for librarians, and it's going to continue to evolve.
Yeah. I have thought the same for many years, that we were not going to be rendered obsolete as a profession. rather with all this proliferation of stuff and sources and huge quantities increasing all the time, that our role as the people trained in how to organize and manage those huge amounts of data would become even more and more important than it has been in the past.
Well, it's overwhelming.
Oh, it is.
And it's not just the amount of information, it's the technologies too, and the methodologies and the formats, and it is overwhelming.
I've been retired 10 years now,
Oh.
and I suspect if I came back into the field, I would have a tremendous learning curve of all that's occurred in the last 10 years.
I'm
Even
sure.
though I think I keep up somewhat from being retired. It's not the same as working with it hands-on every day.
No, I think not. But I'm sure that the library in the new building will be beautiful and useful in its own way, and the community will benefit.
Well, I am looking forward after it's open to
Mhm.
figure out how to get myself back here so I can see it.
Well, I'm sure.
See
I'm
the
sure you
people,
will.
and I imagine it'll be a very fine operation. They have a long tradition of that.
Yeah.
Of course, there's a certain amount of self-serving in that statement.
Well, that's okay.
But
That's okay.
Billy Joe's has been at the helm for 10 years now, and it just has continued to soar. And I'm delighted that they're going to be moving to a new facility in just a couple of years.
That's right. I think summer of 2015.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what I'm hearing.
that's right.
Well, certainly, Ellen, I want to offer you an opportunity as we near the end of this interview. If there's anything that we haven't talked about that you'd like to mention at this point.
No, I really don't think so. I thank you for the opportunity to talk today, but I think we've pretty much covered everything.
Well, thank you, Ellen Schaffer, for talking to us this afternoon, and I appreciate it very much to have this opportunity.
You too.